Derek Hunt had been enduring the grind of audition after audition for years. His passion for acting was unwavering, but his luck seemed to be perpetually out of reach. On a particularly disheartening day, after yet another failed audition, he decided to take a walk through the quaint streets of the city to clear his mind. As he wandered aimlessly, he stumbled upon a small, dimly lit antique shop tucked away between towering buildings. The shop, with its weathered sign and dusty windows, seemed to call out to him. Curiosity piqued, Derek pushed open the creaky door, causing a bell to jingle softly. The interior was a treasure trove of oddities, old books, vintage furniture, peculiar trinkets, and relics from a bygone era. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. As Derek meandered through the cluttered aisles, his eyes fell upon a shelf displaying an array of masks. Among them, one stood out. It was an exquisite antique mask, intricately carved from dark wood and adorned with delicate filigree. The craftsmanship was impeccable, with every line and curve telling a story of its own. The mask's eyes were hollow, yet they seemed to gaze into Derek's soul. "Ah, you have a good eye," a voice said from behind him. Derek turned to see an elderly man, the shop owner, watching him with a knowing smile. The man's eyes were sharp and penetrating, as if he could see into Derek's very essence. "Isn't it beautiful?" the shop owner continued, stepping closer. "This mask has a history. It once belonged to a famous thespian from the early 19th century. They say it has the power to bring out the true potential of whoever wears it." Derek's heart raced. He was skeptical, of course, but the allure of the mask was undeniable. He gently lifted it off the shelf, feeling a strange connection as his fingers brushed against the smooth surface. "How much for this?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. The old man named a surprisingly modest price, and without hesitation, Derek bought the mask. He left the shop with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, clutching the mask tightly as if it were a lifeline. That evening, back in his small apartment, Derek couldn't resist the urge to try on the mask. He stood before the mirror, took a deep breath, and carefully placed it over his face. The instant the mask touched his skin, a surge of energy coursed through his body. It was as if a dormant part of his soul had been awakened. He began reciting lines from various plays, his voice resonating with a newfound depth and clarity. Each word, each gesture, felt imbued with a power he had never experienced before. It was as if the mask had unlocked a hidden reservoir of talent and confidence. The following day, Derek attended another audition, this time for the lead role in a prestigious play. With the memory of the mask's power fresh in his mind, he delivered a performance that left the casting directors in awe. They were captivated by his intensity and emotional range, and for the first time in his career, Derek felt truly seen and appreciated. He was offered the lead role on the spot, and as he walked out of the theater, he felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. The mask had given him the breakthrough he had always dreamed of. Little did he know, this newfound success came with a price far greater than he could have ever imagined. As Derek's reputation soared, and his performances became the talk of the theater world, the mask became his most prized possession. He wore it for every rehearsal, every show, and even during his private practice sessions. It seemed to enhance his abilities, drawing out emotions and depths he didn't know he possessed. But as the days turned into weeks, Derek began to notice subtle, unsettling changes. Off-stage, he found it increasingly difficult to distinguish between reality and the roles he played. His emotions became volatile, swinging wildly between elation and despair. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the pressures of his newfound success. Yet deep down, a nagging fear took root, whispering that something far more sinister was at play. In quiet moments, Derek would catch glimpses of himself in mirrors and reflective surfaces, and for brief, disconcerting seconds, the face staring back at him seemed different, unfamiliar and menacing. The mask's influence was growing, and Derek's grip on his own identity was starting to slip. With each passing performance, Derek's portrayal of his character became more intense and mesmerizing, earning him widespread acclaim. Critics hailed him as a prodigious talent, and his name became synonymous with brilliance in the theater world. The mask, always with him, seemed to amplify his abilities, transforming his performances into unforgettable experiences. However, Derek's offstage life began to unravel. The first signs were subtle: a heightened emotional sensitivity, difficulty sleeping, and an inability to separate himself from the roles he played. It wasn't long before these symptoms intensified, and Derek found himself plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams. In these nightmares, he was not just wearing the mask, but becoming it. His identity blurred with that of the characters he portrayed, and the line between performance and reality grew increasingly thin. One night, after a particularly powerful performance, Derek returned to his dressing room, physically and emotionally drained. As he stared at his reflection, the mask still adorning his face, he felt an unfamiliar resistance when he tried to remove it. The mask seemed to cling to his skin, as if it had fused with him. Panic surged through him as he struggled to pry it off. Finally, with a painful effort, he managed to remove the mask, gasping for breath as he did so. Examining the mask, Derek noticed that the carvings had become more intricate, almost alive, shifting subtly under his gaze. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Determined to understand the mask's origins and its growing hold over him, Derek delved into research. He scoured libraries, contacted historians, and even consulted occult experts, piecing together the mask's dark history. He discovered that the mask was crafted in the early 19th century by a renowned artist who was also rumored to dabble in the occult. The mask had been owned by a series of actors, each of whom had experienced a meteoric rise in their careers, followed by a swift and tragic descent into madness. The most notable owner was an actor named Victor Lagrange, whose performances were legendary. However, Lagrange's life ended abruptly when he disappeared under mysterious circumstances after descending into insanity. As Derek uncovered these chilling details, he couldn't ignore the parallels to his own life. The mask had indeed granted him unparalleled talent, but at a steep cost. The more he wore it, the more he felt consumed by a dark presence within the mask, an entity that seemed to feed on his emotions and gradually erode his sense of self. Despite the growing fear and the disturbing discoveries, Derek found himself unable to part with the mask. It had become an addiction, a crutch he relied on to maintain his extraordinary performances. He wore it not only on stage, but also during rehearsals and in private moments, seeking the power it bestowed. But the mask's influence extended beyond the theater. Derek's relationships with friends and colleagues began to suffer. They noticed his erratic behavior, his mood swings, and his increasing detachment from reality. His closest friend, Emily, a fellow actor, confronted him one evening after a rehearsal. "Derek, you're scaring me," she said, her voice trembling with concern. "You're not yourself anymore. This mask, it's changing you." Derek, defensive and agitated, brushed off her concerns. "You don't understand, Emily. This mask, it makes me better. It helps me reach depths I never thought possible." "But at what cost, Derek?" Emily pressed. "You're losing yourself. Can't you see that?" Her words echoed in his mind long after she left, but Derek was trapped in the mask's thrall. The whispers in his head grew louder, urging him to embrace the power fully, to surrender to its dark embrace. One fateful night, after a particularly grueling performance, Derek returned to his apartment, utterly exhausted. He collapsed onto his bed, still wearing the mask. As he drifted into a restless sleep, he was plagued by a series of vivid, haunting visions. In these dreams, he was Victor Lagrange, experiencing the highs and lows of Lagrange's life, feeling his triumphs and his descent into madness. Derek awoke with a start, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The mask felt heavier, almost suffocating. He stumbled to the bathroom, desperate to remove it. As he stared at his reflection, he saw not just his own face, but flashes of Victor Lagrange's visage overlaying his own. It was as if the mask was merging their identities, binding them together across time. With a Herculean effort, Derek managed to tear the mask off and threw it across the room. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror. The mask lay on the floor, its intricate carvings seeming to pulse with a sinister life of their own. Derek knew then that he had to uncover the full truth about the mask before it consumed him entirely. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Derek dedicated himself to unraveling the mask's secrets. He delved deeper into historical records, tracing the mask's journey through the hands of its previous owners. Each story was eerily similar: meteoric success, growing instability, and a tragic end. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Derek realized that the mask was not just an artifact, but a vessel for a malevolent force. This entity fed on the emotions and talents of its wearers, granting them power at the cost of their sanity and souls. The mask's allure was its greatest weapon, drawing in those desperate for success and then consuming them from within. Armed with this knowledge, Derek faced a harrowing choice. He could either find a way to destroy the mask and break its hold over him, or succumb to its power and risk losing himself completely. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Derek knew he had to act before it was too late. The mask's dark influence over Derek grew more insidious with each passing day. His once clear distinction between his roles and his real life blurred beyond recognition. He felt like a marionette, with the mask pulling the strings, each tug nudging him closer to madness. Derek's apartment, once a sanctuary of creativity and peace, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him, and shadows danced in the corners of his vision. He started hearing voices, whispers that echoed through the rooms, calling his name and urging him to embrace the power of the mask fully. His once flourishing relationships with friends and colleagues deteriorated rapidly. Emily, his closest confidant, grew increasingly worried. She tried to reach out to him, but Derek, consumed by paranoia and the mask's influence, pushed her away. His mood swings became more violent, oscillating between manic euphoria and deep, crushing despair. One evening, after a particularly intense rehearsal, Derek found himself alone in the theater. The lights were dim, casting eerie shadows across the empty seats. He sat on the edge of the stage, the mask clutched in his hands. It felt warm, almost alive, pulsating with a sinister energy. He put the mask on, seeking solace in its familiar embrace. Instantly, he was transported into another vision. This time, it was Victor Lagrange's final performance. Derek felt the weight of Lagrange's anguish, his desperation, as he struggled to free himself from the mask's grip. The audience's applause morphed into mocking laughter, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of their own. Derek ripped the mask off, panting heavily. His heart raced and his hands trembled. The visions were becoming more vivid, more real, and he could feel the mask's control tightening around his mind. He knew he was running out of time. Determined to break free, Derek intensified his research. He discovered that the mask was created by a man named Alistair Voss, an occultist and craftsman who believed that true artistic genius required a connection to the spiritual realm. Voss had infused the mask with dark energies, intending to harness the creativity of the wearers for his own purposes. Each wearer's talent and life force were consumed by the mask, feeding the entity within. Derek realized he needed to find a way to destroy the mask and sever its connection to the malevolent force. He contacted a group of paranormal investigators who specialized in ancient artifacts. They agreed to meet him at his apartment, intrigued by his story and the potential danger of the mask. The night of their meeting, Derek sat in his living room, the mask placed on the table before him. The investigators arrived, bringing with them an array of tools and ancient texts. They began to perform a series of rituals, hoping to weaken the mask's power and uncover its true nature. As they chanted and invoked protective spells, the room grew colder. The air felt thick and oppressive, and Derek's anxiety mounted. He watched in horror as the mask seemed to writhe and shift, its carvings glowing with an eerie light. Derek felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The entity within the mask was more powerful than they had anticipated. The investigators regrouped, their faces pale but determined. They continued their efforts, their chants growing louder and more fervent. As the ritual intensified, Derek's mind was assaulted by a barrage of visions. He saw the faces of all the mask's previous owners, their lives destroyed, their talents consumed. He felt their pain, their despair, and their final moments of madness. Amidst the chaos, Derek realized that the mask was not just an object, but a gateway. It linked the living world to a dark, otherworldly realm where the entity resided. To destroy the mask, he needed to sever this connection. Gathering his strength, Derek joined the investigators in their chants, focusing all his willpower on breaking the bond. The mask trembled violently, and the entity's voice grew louder, screaming in fury. In a final, desperate effort, Derek grabbed the mask and held it aloft. "I reject you," he shouted. "You have no power over me." The mask's glow intensified, blinding him with its brilliance. The room shook, and Derek felt a searing pain as the mask seemed to burn his hands. But he held on, refusing to let go. With a deafening roar, the mask shattered into pieces, releasing a burst of dark energy that dissipated into the air. The room fell silent, and the oppressive weight lifted. Derek collapsed to the floor, exhausted but free. The investigators helped him to his feet, their faces a mix of relief and astonishment. The mask was destroyed, and the entity banished. But Derek knew that the experience had left an indelible mark on his soul. His ordeal was far from over. The visions and whispers continued to haunt him, a lingering reminder of the mask's influence. He found it increasingly difficult to sleep, his dreams filled with nightmarish images of the entity and its victims. One night, unable to bear the torment any longer, Derek stood on the edge of his apartment balcony, the remnants of the mask in his hand. He was ready to end it all when Emily, who had been worried about his silence, arrived just in time. She pulled him back from the brink, her eyes filled with tears and fear. "Derek, please," she pleaded, "let me help you. We can get through this together." Shaken and terrified by what he had almost done, Derek finally realized he needed professional help. Emily helped him check into a psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed with severe dissociative disorder and post-traumatic stress. The doctors listened to his story with a mix of skepticism and concern. They took the remnants of the mask and locked them away, treating Derek's condition with intensive therapy and medication. In the hospital, Derek met others who had faced their own battles with madness. Their stories gave him a glimmer of hope that he could reclaim his life. But the haunting presence of the mask lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. As he stared out of the hospital window, Derek vowed to uncover the full truth about the mask, to ensure it could never ensnare another soul. But deep down, he feared that the mask's grip on his mind might never truly be broken. Derek's first days in the psychiatric hospital were a blur of evaluations and therapy sessions. The doctors, while compassionate, were skeptical about his story of the mask. They attributed his vivid hallucinations and erratic behavior to severe dissociative disorder and trauma from the pressures of his acting career. Emily visited him daily, offering support and encouragement. Her presence was a lifeline for Derek, a reminder of the world outside and the person he once was. Despite the medication and therapy, the remnants of the mask's influence lingered in his mind. The whispers, though faint, persisted, and the nightmarish visions haunted his sleep. In the hospital, Derek met other patients who shared their stories of battling their own inner demons. He found solace in their camaraderie and began to open up during group therapy sessions. The staff introduced him to various coping mechanisms, mindfulness, grounding exercises, and creative outlets. He took up painting, using it as a way to express the turmoil within him. As weeks turned into months, Derek made gradual progress. The intensity of the hallucinations diminished, and he began to regain a sense of self. However, the memory of the mask and its dark power never fully left him. It was a constant shadow, lurking at the edges of his consciousness. One day, during a particularly challenging therapy session, Dr. Lawson, his psychiatrist, broached the topic of the mask. "Derek, you've mentioned the mask frequently. Can you tell me more about its origins and what you discovered?" Derek nodded, realizing the truth in Dr. Lawson's words. The mask, whether truly supernatural or not, had been a catalyst for his descent into madness. But he also understood that it was his own mind, his own fears and insecurities, that had given the mask its power over him. As part of his therapy, Derek was encouraged to confront his past and reclaim his identity. He wrote detailed accounts of his experiences, each word a step towards understanding and healing. He also reached out to the paranormal investigators who had tried to help him. They shared their findings and speculations, further grounding Derek's experiences in a context that made sense to him. Emily remained a steadfast presence throughout his recovery. Their relationship, once strained, grew stronger as they faced the challenges together. Emily's unwavering support helped Derek find the strength to keep fighting, even when the road ahead seemed daunting. One evening, as Derek and Emily sat in the hospital's garden, she brought up a delicate subject. "Derek, have you thought about what you'll do once you're discharged? What comes next?" Derek sighed, staring at the fading sunset. "I don't know, Emily. Acting has always been my passion, but now, I'm not sure if I can go back to it. Not after everything that's happened." Emily took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to decide right now. Just know that whatever you choose, I'll be here for you." Derek smiled, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Emily. I couldn't have made it this far without you." As his discharge date approached, Derek felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. He knew the real test would begin once he was back in the outside world, away from the structured environment of the hospital. He prepared himself mentally, armed with the coping strategies he had learned and the support of his loved ones. Upon leaving the hospital, Derek returned to his apartment, which had been cleaned and rearranged by Emily in his absence. The remnants of the mask had been disposed of, and the space felt different, lighter, freer. Yet the memories of his ordeal were ever present. Determined to build a new life, Derek explored other avenues for his creativity. He enrolled in art classes, using painting as a therapeutic outlet. He also began volunteering at a local community theater, sharing his experiences and mentoring young actors. Though he avoided performing, being part of the theater world in a different capacity helped him reconnect with his passion in a healthier way. Months turned into years, and Derek gradually forged a new path for himself. He continued to see Dr. Lawson for regular checkups, ensuring he stayed on track with his mental health. The whispers and visions never fully disappeared, but they became manageable, like distant echoes rather than overwhelming forces. One day, while sorting through some old papers, Derek found a letter from one of the paranormal investigators. It contained a brief but poignant message. "The mask's power is broken, but its memory lingers. You have the strength to overcome it. Remember, it's not the mask that defines you, but your own will." Derek took these words to heart. He knew that the journey to reclaiming his life would be ongoing, but he was no longer the man who had been consumed by the mask. He was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. As he stood at the window, looking out at the bustling city, Derek felt a sense of peace. The mask, with all its dark allure, was part of his past. His future was his to shape, free from its sinister influence. And with Emily by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead.